Welcome back to Module 1, Email Basics. Here in Lesson 5, we're talking about cleaning your list. This is something that not enough people do, and I want to introduce the concept to you about it so that you have it in your mind. Now, if you have an existing list, you're going to want to get started with this now. Now, if your list is small and you're kind of in early phases, you can wait a bit, and we will in the final module. I will give you some kind of insight a little bit more in kind of the emails that you'll use as part of this, but wanted to introduce the concept because it really is something you need to be thinking about. The concept basically is that when the relationship fizzles, say goodbye. In other words, if people aren't opening your emails, if they're just there sitting as kind of dead weight on your email list, there is no reason to keep them there, and you should say goodbye to them. And that's what we're going to talk about why you do it and how you do it in this lesson. So in this lesson, you'll learn why you need to clean your list, how to conduct a list scrub manually, and then we'll talk briefly about how to automate a list scrub sequence. Again, that will depend on which system you use, but we'll talk generally about how you can do that so that it's just always happening in the background, and it's something that's kind of a machine that you don't even have to worry about. So that's what we're going to cover. Now, look, list size is a vanity metric that you should not focus on. You should focus on the people who are opening emails, not the people who aren't. And a lot of people are worried that when they, if they do this list scrub, all of a sudden, they're not going to have as big of a list. And what I will tell you is that in 2019, at the end of 2019, I had scrubbed somewhere between 2 and 3 times as many people as remained on my list. I had actively removed them from my list. Yeah, you heard that right. My list could have been somewhere between 3 and almost 4 times as big as it was if I didn't do the list scrubs. But that wouldn't have mattered because those people weren't opening my emails. And so you need to understand that you shouldn't worry about those people, and there are good reasons why you want to scrub your list. Now, one of the most important, aside from the fact that it can save you some money, is that if you keep people who aren't opening emails on your active list, it hurts your email deliverability across the board. Now, maybe you've had this experience where you're on someone's list and for a while their emails are going to your inbox, but you're just never opening them. And then all of a sudden you notice maybe they start going to the promotions tab or maybe to the spam folder. Or if you're using some system, that sorts your email box, maybe it's just kind of automatically sorting them into a folder that you don't really look at. That's what happens generally. And what you need to understand is we don't really understand exactly how Google, for example, does and how the Gmail system works about moving things over. We have some insight, but one of the things that generally happens is that systems are tracking how many of your emails are open versus not. And if you think about it from Gmail's perspective, this makes sense, right? Because if you're someone who is sending 1,000 emails and they were all to friends, you would expect most of them to get opened. Well, if you're sending 1,000 emails and only, 100 of them are getting opened, it's a pretty good sign to Gmail or to G Suite that people don't want your email. And it's also a pretty good sign that it's promotions. So that's why it kind of moves down. And I am not a guru on email deliverability. I know some tricks. I've done some things that work to make sure that things keep going to people's inbox. But one thing I will tell you is that people will talk about this, how after a while their emails, like their open rates are kind of going down. And I don't focus too much on open rates, but it kind of trends downward and then it falls off a cliff. And when that happens, it's a sign that kind of what's happened is eventually the systems have said, okay, these are promos, we're putting it to spam. And once your emails start going to spam for across the board or to large numbers of people, it really will affect how many people ever see the messages you send. So one of the things you need to do is don't send emails to people who are consistently not opening. So you should consistently remove inactive subscribers from active lists. And that's what a list scrub is. And really, this is about removing people from, in the last lesson, you'll remember one of the segments we talked about is your weekly email list. we're talking about taking people off of that list. So we'll, take people who are not opening off of that on an ongoing basis. Now, you're going to apply the rule of 3 here. I like this rule of 3. It happens to be a 3-step process, so we have 3s everywhere, so it's easy to remember. Subscribers who haven't opened an email in 3 months get a 3-email sequence before they're removed. So again, 3 months, 3-email sequence. And that's the process. We're going to talk about it in a second. But just understand that and keep that in your mind. Now, some people are more aggressive and will remove people if they haven't opened in 2 months. And I'm okay with that. But most people don't even like the concept of removing people at all. So I'm going to let you start with people who haven't opened in 3 months, and then you use a 3-email sequence. So let's talk about the 3-step process here. First, and this is the manual process, you identify subscribers who haven't opened for 90 days. Then you're going to send a 3-email list scrub sequence. And then finally, you're going to remove anyone who doesn't click on a link in that sequence to stay. So that's a quick overview. And now we're going to go through those steps in a bit more depth. But that's what you're going to do. You're going to identify people who are inactive. You're going to send them this sequence. And then you're going to remove anyone who doesn't click to stay. So you start by identifying inactive subscribers. This is something you'll have to figure out how to do it within your system. Kartra, which I use, allows me to literally check someone who hasn't opened opened any emails within the last 90 days, and I can do that. But you're going to have to search through your email service provider and identify everybody who hasn't opened anything in the last 90 days. You're going to remove them from your active email list, so from your weekly list, and then add them to a list scrub list, a list which is for the purpose of doing this list cleaning. Now, one thing I want to make sure you understand, part of why we are going to send this sequence is that the data about whether people are opening or not is not perfect. The way that systems track it, there's like a little image file included in these emails. If that image file is opened or downloaded, I think it is, it's tracked as an open. Now, some people have their systems set so that they don't download images. So if that's the way it's set, the system will not track them as having opened at all. So, it's not a perfect science. So you have to understand that, but it's the best we have. So you identify them and then put them on this list scrub list. Then you are going to send a 3-email sequence. And this is part of why, this is how it is that you're able to recapture people who maybe are opening but have a technical system that it's not checking it. So you'll create 3 emails telling your inactive subscribers that they're going to be removed from your list unless they click on a link in the email. That link will then just take them to a page saying, woohoo, we're glad you stayed, or something like that. Just a quick confirmation. But they have to click on that link or they will be removed. Then on the back end, you're going to set up a system so that anyone who clicks on that link gets added back to your weekly email list. So you're automating it somewhat, even in the manual process. But basically what happens is when they click on that link, it puts them back onto your active email list. Then anyone who didn't click just gets removed from all your lists, put on that inactive leads list that I talked about, that I have is just kind of this thing of people who are there. Now, the reason why I keep them on there instead of deleting them is because they might wake up 3 weeks after the email sequence, like after I've removed them, and click on the link. Now, if I have deleted them from my system, that link's not going to do any good. But as long as they're in my system, when they click on that link, it will reactivate them and put them back onto my list. So that's the process that you can use for a list clean. That's how you do it manually. You just do this periodically. If you're doing it manually, you want to get in the practice of doing this every 90 days. So quarterly, you need to do this to clean your list. Now, eventually, you'll want to automate the process with sequences and automations within your email service provider. So I mentioned earlier that we have a system that is automatically applying hot, warm, cold tags based upon how long it's been since people have opened an email. So that is done in Kartra through a sequence and with automations. And if someone gets through 90 days without ever being taken out and then put back at the beginning of that sequence, what will happen is the system automatically takes them off of my weekly emails, sends them the sequence to see if they want to stay on my list. If they click on a link, it adds them back in. If they don't, it just moves them over to that inactive leads list. So it's done all with sequences and automations. Now, I'm going to encourage you long-term, you're going to want to look into doing this within your email service provider. The reason why is this way you don't have to mess with this anymore. Then what is happening is just all the time people are being automatically scrubbed off your list if they're not opening, and you don't even have to worry about this. It's just something that your list is constantly being cleaned in the background, so you're constantly focusing on the people who are actually opening your emails on an ongoing basis. So that's how you'll automate it. Again, we can't go too much into depth here because it will depend from a technical standpoint on the system that you are using, but that gives you an overview of how the process would work. So the key lesson takeaway is to stop worrying about vanity metrics and remove subscribers who aren't opening your emails to increase your overall email deliverability. That will make things much stronger over the long term. Now, in the next lesson, which is the last substantive lesson here in Module 1, we're going to talk about how to pick the right email service provider. Now, I'm going to give you my recommendation for an all-in-one system and my recommendation for standalone email service providers. Now, if you love the system you're using, great. You don't have to go with my options. I'm just going to tell you what I'm looking for, the advantages of each, and why I recommend them. And, it'll be a good refresher to think through what you should be looking for in an email service provider. I'll see you in the next lesson.